is Money Talks, it is John Gibbons. I am with the endlessly brainy Dave Powell to talk about the sexy word of how finances are structured, how these deals are paid for, because we've had a request. Someone said, how does all this money work? Liverpool have spent a lot this summer. They've got in some fantastic players. They've gone over £100 million twice. They had the room to do that because of PSR, because of past dealings. We've talked about that on previous shows, so people sort of scroll back and found those. That they're all there on YouTube or podcast. If you want to understand better how Liverpool were able to do this. But I still assume, Dave, that Liverpool didn't have £400 million sitting in the bank waiting to be fired off to various clubs around the world. So how does it work, and what kind of things do the football clubs need to think about when structuring these deals? And how important has it become? Because it almost feels like now when clubs are haggling between each other, they're almost more talking about how a deal's going to be structured rather than the amounts.
Yeah, I mean, we saw early signs of that in the summer when Manchester United tried to sign Matheus Cunha. A lot of that was based upon how much United would pay upfront for Cunha. I mean, no club carries that amount of cash in the bank. They have revolving credit facilities which are available to use. Liverpool's at its maximum is about 300 million, I think, and that's there for cash flow of the business, to pay down transfer instalments as and when they're due. But largely as a last resort, really. I mean, they'd like to cash flow all their transfer business through player sales. Now, when you're buying a player, you are effectively spreading for accounting purposes, spreading the cost of his guaranteed sum, so minus any add-ons that you might include in the deal. You're spreading that over the life of a contract, which is now capped at 5 years. So after Chelsea went on that splurge at the start of the Todd Bowley and Clearlake Capital regime there, where they were offering 7, 8, 9 year contracts, that was done to reduce the amortization figure each year, which is the figure which is the guaranteed sum divided by length of term of the contract. So now Liverpool's amortization costs for the last financial year, which were the 23-24, most recently one that had been published, were about 114 million. Now, to put that into some context, Chelsea's was just above 200 million. Now, even with all the transfer business that has gone on this summer, signing Alexander Isak, Ekitike, Vert, I mean, it's so many that it's probably daft me listing them all. It's about 80 to 85 million in terms of annual amortization costs, which you would add to the balance sheet. So, but the flip side of that is that they've sold lots of players. Now, a lot of those players have been academy products, which don't carry any book value. Therefore, anything you sell them for is pure profit, and that's money you can account for straight away in your accounts. Happy days. You don't get all that money at once, by the way. That's what you can account for that money. Okay. So you get that money in dribs and drabs, as is agreed through the payment structure with the buying club. Now, they had the sales of Darwin Núñez and Luis Diaz both required them to clear remaining book value, which is the amortization costs, which Núñez and Diaz still had on the books, before they could realise a profit. Now, they did that, and I think they made profit of about 14 something on Núñez after his amortization costs were cleared. So they haven't made a loss on him at all, because it's like anything, you have a useful life of something, and
so in accounting terms, they made a profit because he's been useful for the time.
He's been useful for 3 years.
Yeah,
of that service.
Gotcha.
So Diaz was sold at a really high sum, so 60 odd million. I think the profit on that was over 50. So taking that into account, the actual amortization cost, you're removing what sat on the balance sheet for those two players, which means that the actual, I think from my mental arithmetic that I did the other day for a piece for the Echo, was about 38 million being added in terms of amortized costs. So if you take that into consideration on the 114 million, it's still under 150 million, far less than Chelsea, Manchester United, and the club has greater revenue. Flip side of that is wages, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But yeah, so that's how these deals are structured. So as long as you can manage the costs of those players, acquiring them on the balance sheet, and also meet the requirements, the tangible need for cash, which which has to take place between buying and selling club. Then you're fine. Now they have that because they sold lots and lots of players this summer for a great deal of profit. So they've got cash. They're able to cash flow deals in with deals out. So it's been a successful summer. One of the wildest Liverpool transfer windows I can remember, maybe ever. But it's one which, when you get down to the actual mechanics and financials of it, it's not as big a risk as it may seem.
There's a lot to get into there, Dave, based on what you talked about.
It's a really long-winded.
No, I was into it, and I followed 90% of it, I think. But no, you explained it really clearly. But what came across to me, there's a couple of things came across to me when you were talking. But the first one I want to talk about is the benefits of being good sellers, and it's something that has been talked about with Liverpool in the past. But the way you laid it out there really sort of demonstrates that if you could be a club that sells players at the right time, and you feel like they've done that with Luis Diaz. As a supporter, I miss watching him. I liked him because he gave everything on the pitch. But from the point of view of from a financial point of view, it's a really good deal because, I mean, it's a profit in terms of what they paid. It's a massive profit, as you've just described, based on what was left, to sort of pay off. But also it opens up this opportunity for Liverpool to go bigger on other players.
Yeah, I mean, in order for this to happen, yes, they were doing it from a position of strength because they won the Premier League last season. Revenues have gone up. Champions League football is kind of a shoe-in again. Now they've made moves to ensure they solidify that. It'd be some fall off to not make Champions League football with the squad they've assembled, and that's like moving forward for a few years now. So they'd be looking at that being almost guaranteed revenue. But the two things have to align. So you have to have basically the players you are going to sign are either replacing players who you can find a marketplace for to sell, and you also have to have a pool of players which you can sell to generate profit. Now, Liverpool haven't had that for a few seasons. I know we still talk about, after the Isak deal was concluded, everyone talks about the Coutinho money still being floating around. That's it must have invested it in Bitcoin or something. But they haven't had a really good summer of selling academy products for high fees for a little while, and maybe last summer, it was only Chiesa came in, 10 million guaranteed, 2.5 million on top of that. Mamardashvili counted for this summer, so little expenditure because they didn't get too much in, So the two things have to align because you have to be able to cash flow these deals as well as, but you also have to have a willing marketplace. Now, last summer wasn't. You have to look at who is going where. Because recruitment departments will look, before they sign a player, they'll look at who gets replaced. Is there a market for some of these players? What clubs who could possibly be buying out there might need a Luis Diaz or a Darwin Núñez and be willing to pay what we need to be able to remove that cost off the balance sheet and then bring other players in sensibly. So the arrival of Saudi has actually solved a few problems for Premier League teams. Because it's very hard for Premier League teams now. They've got themselves into
the top of the food chain.
Yeah, they are, and there's nowhere else for them to go. So it used to be that, the 90s was the Serie A and its pomp. I mean, that was where everyone wanted to go and play for AC Milan or Inter Milan or Juventus. Then La Liga, still got Real Madrid and Barcelona, but now Barcelona got hit by COVID, can't spend. Real Madrid do theirs on a piecemeal basis. No one in Italy is buying top talent from the Premier League because it's too expensive to take the wages on board unless they're subsidised. French footballs, despite PSG's success, is struggling significantly with finances, and Germany just has, Bayern Munich as the outlier, really. So there's nowhere for anyone to go apart from Saudi, and Saudi has managed to pick up a bit of slack in that respect. But there needs to be a buying market in order for clubs to operate successfully. So I think Liverpool, in terms of both incomings and outgoings, it's been a tremendous window, one where both things have aligned and it's allowed them to cash for their business and not place an enormous financial burden or risk on the football club. Wages are going to be the main thing, I think, because with success comes bonus payments, and they're already going to have to pay bonus payments to win the Premier League. That's a good problem to have. But I think some of this, for me, I think part of it is Fenway Sports Group don't want to be left out of what the FIFA Club World Cup will possibly become in the future, because that's going to be an important revenue stream for the biggest clubs, because the money's only going to rise. So I think this is all, some of it's short-term, they get the short-term credit, everyone gets a lift. Medium-term, prospects look better on the pitch. Long-term, prospects look better for qualifying for competitions which are going to generate huge revenues.
The way these deals are structured then, and that's both in terms of financial but also actual, football clubs have to have these things on the horizon. They know, as supporters, we spend all this money this summer and then we forget about it, and then next January and next summer we're like, oh, where are the signings now? Football clubs can't do that because, it might sound great, I guess, saying £120 million will pay £40 million over 3 years, but then what happens is next summer that Newcastle put the hand out for £40 million, and clubs have got themselves in a little bit of trouble with this, haven't they? Pushing things down the line sounds great, but you've still sort of got to pay it. I know Liverpool have been on the receiving end from it, from a few football clubs who were like, actually we sort of haven't got this money now, and other clubs in this country have struggled to spend because of spending that they've done in the past. And so there's no such thing as a free lunch, I guess, and there's no such thing as endless credit. If you spend big, even though you're not necessarily paying for it that summer, you are paying for it eventually.
There's a source from Kieran Maguire the other day saying that an industry built on credit's good until it isn't. And effectively that's what the Premier League is hurtling towards. Because everyone's players on credit and they're banking on future revenues to pay down the transfer debt. My feeling is the Núñez deal probably came with Al Hilal paying a significant sum up front to get it done, because they have the ability financially through regulations, for the lack of regulation, I imagine, to be able to do that. And probably, if you have the ability often to pay more up front, it will give you better leverage to drive down the overall transfer fee. So I imagine that's been the one where they've got serious cash through the door. Aston Villa, they've kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit with Harvey Elliott till next summer to have to try and pay. And you look at, Leon aren't cash rich at the moment, the Tyler Morton thing. So again, you imagine you're not getting huge sums right through the door with this. So, but yeah, Liverpool have given themselves, I imagine, through the Núñez and Diaz deals, the ability to kind of have cash at hand to get this done. Now, it is from a leverage point of view, it would have helped them in securing some players, because they know Liverpool have got big revenues, they've got cash coming into the business. I imagine Newcastle may have held Liverpool's feet to the fire a little bit over how much is up front for the fee. So because they would have seen Liverpool's transfer business throughout the summer and said, well, you've got cash at hand, so you should.
And it helps them to get the money in.
But I think short-term transfer debt can be a dangerous thing. So Manchester United had quite significant kind of short to medium-term transfer debt, and when you marry that with a lack of competitive success, that can be really impactful. So Liverpool's, I imagine, it's a bit more spread evenly, so they can meet these things head on as they arrive. But there's no getting out of the fact that this, in terms of a cash drop, they would have had to see off lots of it this summer. But in terms of actual money at hand, I think they probably generated a bit more.
Are there any other clubs then who, got themselves in trouble recently on stuff like this, in terms of, they've gone big to try and get the big prize, and then it hasn't quite happened, and they're left owing money, and with that income not coming in?
Well, it's often clubs who come up from the Championship into the Premier League, where you have given this big drop of cash which you didn't have previously, and the security of knowing that you've got 3 years, parachute payments. So who is it that came up at Leeds? When Leeds went down, they'd spent big on, was it Jorginho, Rutter, players like that? As soon as they go down, they've got to sell all these big assets which they paid money for. Chelsea were at a point where if they wouldn't have had the ability to sell a women's team and sell some of these other kind of tangible assets that exist around the stadium, then would have been a real challenge, because if you miss out on Champions League revenue for a couple of seasons, it has a real knock-on effect. Arsenal spent a few years in the wilderness because they'd found themselves on the outside of that Champions League group. Now they're back in it, the revenues are high, and they can compete in that market. Now Manchester United are a similar boat, really. They've spent big, not compared to what some teams have done in the market this summer, but they've spent significantly this summer now. They're still Manchester United, they have huge revenues and they know that they can rely on that to a point, but there is only so much longer that they can continue without having European football and that not be impactful to what they're doing, and then they'll have to sell off some of the family silver to try and make ends meet. But that's through poor strategy and decision making that precedes the Jim Ratcliffe era or the Ruben Amorim managerial era. So that's what years and years and years of poor management brings. Now, when you have churn at the top with owners, that can cause, when you have two different spending strategies, that can cause problems, whereas Liverpool have the benefit of having stable ownership over the past 15 years, so they kind of know exactly where they are and what they're doing.
Yeah. We're going to have a quick break from talking about football finance, talk about the equally exciting subject of internet security. And we are sponsored by NordVPN. We do really appreciate their ongoing support. I appreciate the service that they offer. My multiple devices that I get through one account. Lots of reasons to subscribe to something like NordVPN and to use their service. If you're an international businessman like Dave Powell, they're flying here, there and everywhere, doing deals, talking about deals, meeting high-flying people. You're, of course, never quite sure where you're going to need to log on to. Wi-Fi's in public and things like that. So having that extra peace of mind that comes from NordVPN is really important. But also, if you like to watch sports that are taking place in different countries, or indeed the country that you are in but isn't available where you are, you can change your virtual location with just the click of a button, and it opens up the world of streaming to you. So with the right account or with the right subscription, you can watch whatever it is almost that you like to enjoy. So thanks a lot to NordVPN for the service they provide. If you are interested, you go to nordvpn.com/TAW and get yourself a fantastic deal available just for you, and you can enjoy all of that and more. There's loads of benefits, to be honest with you, but we like to keep it concise and for you. And we do want to get back right into, we'll talk about wages. Should we talk about wages?
Talk about
because that's the other thing that clubs need to be careful of. So there's not just the fact that these big deals and we all like the transfers coming in, but again, as supporters, we don't necessarily think about the knock-on effects. Liverpool have bought some big players in this summer. They're not alone. That will see the wage bills increase. Football clubs have got to be confident that they can service that. I guess Liverpool are. They're feeling like they're the champions, that they're in a good place. The extra Champions League places coming to the Premier League massively helps, doesn't it? That gives them a little bit of a buffer. But it is something that not just they, but the other top clubs always need to consider, because you buy the best players, they want the best money.
Yeah, and when you buy good players, they cost good money and big wages. It also means that existing players who have been performing and still perform, when their contracts are up for renewal, they want more money.
Yeah.
So you have to be mindful. That was a large thing initially with the initial kind of couple of years back with the initial Mohamed Salah contract stuff, the first extension that he signed, not the last one. That was, I think there's more concern then around, if this was such a significant jump to make him so much better paid than everyone else, what does that look like for the rest of the team?
Yeah.
And renegotiations now. Virgil van Dijk signed a new deal. Him being older, same for Salah now this cycle, little less onus on that because they know it's short-termism. But if you're offering huge wages for a player, you need to know that you're going to have people knocking on your door to try and get their own wages up. If you look at the profile of player Liverpool signed this summer, Wirtz, he'll be on great money, of course, but he's come from Bayer Leverkusen, so he's not going to have been on Premier League wages previously. So they almost get the first cycle of wages before an extension at a reasonable level, even though he's a world-class talent.
Yeah.
You're not signing Kylian Mbappe or Jude Bellingham, where you're going to have to literally pay. You're taking from a premium to pay a premium. They've signed from, without being disrespectful, smaller teams from a smaller pool. So Alexander Isak's wages at Newcastle were about 150,000. I think that was the rumoured figure. Didn't get the extension he wanted to be paid along, in terms of how he delivered. So imagine he's on 200,000 something now, which is something he wouldn't have got at Newcastle, but something which does fit into Liverpool's wage structure. So that's, and the same you look at Kirkes, Frimpong, Leone, players like that. They're all coming in and they're all getting a wage rise from where they were, but probably not towards the top end of Liverpool's. And let's not forget, Trent Alexander-Arnold left in the summer, was a significant wage earner at Liverpool, so that probably frees up in reality 2 spots for potentially me. If you think about Kirkes and Frimpong, probably those, maybe a little bit more, I don't know. But yeah, holding on to the thread of the wage bill is vitally important, because you lose control of that now in the current climate of the Premier League. It's very difficult because there is nowhere to sell these players to. So I always use Manchester United as an example, because it's such a it's kind of a real basket case of a club. It's just they've got players which they still having to shift around. Marcus Rashford, they couldn't find a permanent exit for him.
Yeah.
Because his wages are so huge. He's on £300,000. So they're having to subsidise some of that. He goes to Barcelona because Barcelona can't afford to pay a transfer fee and wages. Then you've got Jadon Sancho, huge wages. Chelsea didn't pick up the option on him, which meant that he's back on United's payroll. He moved on again. But it's hard to find a home for these players with wages, and that's been the issue. So they're having to subsidise elements of Rasmus Højlund and this and the other. So they're having to find ways to get people to take their players.
Yeah.
Because there's no other market that can sustain or afford the kind of wages that Premier League players are on now, even second string Premier League players. And that's a real problem for the market as a whole. That's why we see so much Premier League trading now for big players. So in an ideal world, Manchester United really wouldn't have wanted to have sold Alejandro Garnacho to a Premier League rival. Nor would they have wanted to look at selling Kobe Mainoo to one, in the future. But they know probably they have limited options in terms of who can afford these. So it's important Liverpool don't get themselves into that position, which is why, even Liverpool have a ceiling for what they're willing to offer players. And the only place that can go, has been proven time and time again, the only place that can go above and beyond what Liverpool can really do is Real Madrid. It used to be Barcelona, but now it's just Real Madrid. So without, and that's because they earn $1 billion in revenue a year. First club in the world to do that. So they can afford it. And so I just think Premier League's hurtling towards a bit of a problem in terms of shifting some of these players. That's why we see so much stockpiling. But for Liverpool, the wage bill is going to be very high, 400 million plus. For the first time, but as long as they can continue with competitive success, which the knock-on effect being good commercial success, then they'll be able to afford these rises, because if you are successful and you have to pay bonus payments, it's because you're earning more money as well for it. So, but there are some warning signs flashing about what happens with the market generally.
Where I think Liverpool have been clever is that the biggest earners at Liverpool are people who've won things at Liverpool, have succeeded massively at the club, and so you're on relatively sure footing with that now. You don't know exactly what Mo Salah's going to contribute next season or the season after, of course, but you can take a good guess based on what he's done and how well he looks after himself. And why that's clever is that if anyone comes to Liverpool and says, I want to earn the same as Mo Salah, it's like, well, you need to first get on the pitch and do a season like Mo Salah's done or Virgil's done. They've both been incredible. They're in all-time 11s for Liverpool, and they continue to deliver both consistency and excellence. And so I think that really helps when you've got new players who want to come in and earn a lot, but also the young players at the club. And to contrast that with your example, Manchester United, they got obviously a little bit desperate. So Casemiro's one who comes in. He's only going to come if you pay him what he's earning at Real Madrid, which is a huge amount because, like you've just said, they can afford it. But they didn't want to pay him that anymore because they could see he was on the way down. But Manchester United are desperate, so they take him. So apparently Casemiro's on something like 250 to 300 grand a week. Comes in, isn't great. Kobe Mainoo, who you just mentioned, was on 20 grand a week and then gets to his contract negotiation and apparently asked for 10 times that. And you might see him like, oh, it's a greedy young man. But he's like, well, I'm keeping him out of the team. And that's what apparently Kobe Mainoo was saying when he said, I want to go from 20 to 200 grand. He's like, well, he's on 300 grand. I'm keeping him out the team. So in that instance, if you forget about this mind-boggling money for a while, it's not a bad argument, is it? No. And I think that's the problem you get into if you're throwing big money at these players who you don't know how they're going to be. And then suddenly you've got other guys who you're picking instead. And they're like, well, hang on, why is he on that and I'm on this?
It's the danger of overpaying for short-term gain. Now, I look at the Salah ones and I wonder whether Liverpool do the same. The same with Van Dijk. They probably feel that that value, even, he's bound to be a Liverpool player at the end of his contract. But say he wasn't, and he kind of felt, his numbers dipped significantly. They know there would be a market for Mohamed Salah in Saudi or something like that because they'd be willing to, just because of the sheer gravitas that he brings. Now, United haven't been able to find any of that with any of the players they've signed. They're not a draw for clubs. No fans are flocking to see a 33-year-old Casemiro in Saudi Arabia. But I think the main new thing is fascinating because that was, as you said, it was why would that when you get to yourself to that point where you've got such a discrepancy between what some players are paid and others who aren't performing. That's when it exposes the flaws in kind of recruitment and the actual talk about data pipelines that come through, the whole funnel of talent that comes to the academy. Clubs should already know what ceiling players have and what useful, so you look at the Endo signing, Liverpool know he has a useful, he is a very useful player for them, but they also know that he's not, there's no big contract negotiations coming up for Wataru Endo, so I think the only time Liverpool really have to think about it is if players have a huge breakout season and then continue that for a season or two. But I don't know where they're going now, is the thing. As I said before, there's no marketplace other than Real Madrid for any of these players. The Isak one, but what you can do also to kind of reduce your amortization cost is, say a player comes in, has a great first couple of seasons, you can offer a contract extension, extend that beyond the 5 years. So effectively it brings down, make sure those amortization costs smaller, might offset some of the increased costs in the wage bill. But I think Liverpool have managed theirs well. And I think Isak's probably still, you think about, he is a world-class forward. But because he was underpaid at Newcastle for what he was delivering, they've probably got, he's going to fit within wage structures. So you're not, when Casemiro came in, it's when you sign players on to fix a short-term need and like panic buys, which problems are caused. And if you look at some of those, Manchester United, they've had some dogs of transfer windows, and that comes back to bite you in the backside eventually. Liverpool, it's better to sit out a window like last summer, really. If the players aren't there, because make the wrong decisions, they can be really, really difficult to shift.
And it becomes tough, doesn't it, throughout the football pyramid, and there's knock-on effects, and there's people spending because they want to get up to the Premier League, and we're seeing some owners come in for football clubs now who are willing to spend it. You look at Birmingham City spending £20 million on a player in League One. Your friends at Wrexham not afraid to kind of to throw a little bit of money about.
33 million this summer.
Yeah, but if other clubs then feel under pressure to sort of do the same, whether they can afford it or not, and it's this kind of like fear of missing out that drives a lot of this reckless spending.
It's keeping up with the Joneses, isn't it?
Yeah.
Someone's got, some people can afford shiny things because they have the wealth to be able to back it up. Others do it because they've managed to get hold of a line of credit, and it's champagne lifestyle, lemonade money, So there's elements of that, and I think that trickles down throughout the pyramid, especially in England, because we have such a deep, rich pyramid with so many professional football clubs. I think there's only one team that can win, the league. Everyone else is, someone has to finish bottom.
Yeah.
And no one starts a season, with that as the aim. So, but most clubs spend above what they really should reasonably do, and that includes Premier League clubs. If you were thinking these as businesses assessing risk, you probably, they're very unprofitable businesses. Football in the Premier League is very unprofitable until the time comes to sell the team to someone else. It only takes one misstep of a Premier League season to not make the Champions League, and you've made a loss. Liverpool made a loss in the last published financial year because they missed out on the Champions League. There's so much risk attached to it all, but with a fan base, every fan base demands success and the best. They don't. Well, I'm a Chester fan. I don't. I just didn't. I don't know what I demand. Good pork pies. Bovril in the kiosk. That's about it. But that everyone wants their team to succeed, and owners know that. And football is a vanity play for a lot of owners as well, because they all want to be the best and do the best. So, especially when you're in the Premier League, it's a bit of a peeing contest, isn't it? You've got billionaires upon billionaires upon billionaires, all who have huge wealth personally, who are not used to losing, now acquiring all these teams, wanting the same success, thinking, why can't we break up the established order of things? Well, the established order of things isn't some predetermined, these are the biggest 6 clubs in England. It's because revenues have supported that over time, and success has allowed that to continue. So, to break that up short term requires huge financial risk. So, I just think, everyone is going to spend beyond their means. That's why PSR was brought in the first place, to try and avoid having a Portsmouth who came in, made the UEFA Cup semi-finals or quarter-finals, whatever it was, and then nearly went pop. So, but the handbrake has been pulled up so much now that it stops ambition to a degree. So we're getting into something else there. But I think for as long as there is ego and huge amounts of money funneling into the top level of the game, then it's always going to be risk on as opposed to risk off. So, and that's not going to change. But I think Liverpool probably have the most risk off owners of most historically. I know this summer might suggest otherwise, but I think if you zoom out, I think that probably plays out.
There we are. Ego's ruining everything. That has been another fantastic episode of Money Talks. A huge thanks to Dave Powell, obviously to NordVPN for sponsoring us, and also the guys for making all of this happen. Hope you've enjoyed it. Do let us know in the comments. I think Dave's hair looks amazing, so nothing on that. But anything else, feel free to critique to your heart's content. Up the Reds.